At my daughter's graduation, when the world should have been clapping for her, my life shattered instead. Daniel, my husband of 20 years, stood up in front of everyone and said, "I've decided to start a new life without you." The air froze. My daughter's smile collapsed. And then I saw her, his girlfriend, sitting with our friends, smirking. Everyone waited for me to break. Cry. Beg. But I didn't. I smiled, whispered, "Congratulations on your honesty," and handed him an envelope. Seconds later he opened it and started screaming. At my daughter's graduation, when the world should have been clapping for her, my life shattered instead. Daniel, my husband of 20 years, stood up in front of everyone and said, "I've decided to start a new life without you." The air froze. My daughter's smile collapsed. And then I saw her, his girlfriend, sitting with our friends, smirking. Everyone waited for me to break. Cry. Beg. But I didn't. I smiled, whispered, "Congratulations on your honesty," and handed him an envelope. Seconds later he opened it and started screaming. But let me take you back. Because that scream wasn't just from shock. It was from the truth I had carefully prepared. For months I had felt something slipping. Daniel came home late, smelled of perfume that wasn't mine, brushed off my questions with excuses about work meetings. First I doubted myself. Maybe I was paranoid. Maybe marriage just got dull after 2 decades. But then I started noticing the smallest cracks. Like how he suddenly guarded his phone like it was a bomb. How he showered the moment he got home. How he forgot Emily's debate finals, something he had promised her for months, because he was working late. My heart had been breaking long before the graduation. Every night I'd lie awake asking myself, why isn't love enough? Why isn't our family enough? And yet, part of me already knew the answer. Because I had seen her once before. Stranger, I thought. At the cafe Daniel and I used to visit. She leaned across the table toward him, touching his hand like she owned it. When he spotted me, his face went white. He stammered about a colleague. But her eyes, steady and bold, told me the truth. So yes, by the time Daniel stood up at that graduation, my heartbreak had already been seasoned with anger. And a plan. I refused to let him humiliate me without consequences. That envelope. It wasn't just paper. It was my quiet revenge. Months of gathering evidence, phone records, financial slips, photos he didn't know I'd taken. A neat little package of his lies, tied up in plain white. When he opened it, he expected a pathetic love letter or maybe divorce papers. Instead, he saw proof, undeniable proof, of every betrayal. And worse. Something even he didn't know I had uncovered. Because Daniel had a secret. One that could destroy not just our marriage, but everything he thought he controlled. And when he realized I had it in writing, his scream wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. When people saw me hand Daniel that envelope at Emily's graduation, they thought it was sudden. Like I had planned it as a theatrical moment, a final punch after his announcement. But the truth is, that envelope was the result of years. Years of pain. Years of sacrifice. Years of me holding our family together while Daniel lived 2 lives. I wasn't always this calm, collected woman you saw standing there. No. I was the wife who once begged him to come home on time. Who stayed up late, keeping dinner warm, only to scrape it into the trash when midnight rolled around. I was the wife who smiled through anniversaries he forgot. Who dried my own tears in the bathroom because Emily couldn't see me break. And I was the wife who believed every excuse he gave me. Late meeting. Client dinner. Traffic was a nightmare. I swallowed them all like bitter pills, convincing myself. He works hard for us. He's stressed. He'll come around. But deep down my heart whispered the truth. I remember one night, maybe 2 years before the graduation. Emily had fallen asleep on the couch, waiting for him. She had been holding a handmade Father's Day card, decorated with little stick figures of the 3 of us. When Daniel finally stumbled in, well past midnight, she woke up, eyes bright, ready to give it to him. And you know what he said? "Not now, Daddy's tired." He brushed past her. Straight into the shower. Straight into bed. I watched my daughter's smile fade into confusion, then into silence. She slipped the card onto the table and whispered, "Maybe tomorrow." Tomorrow never came. Moments like that cut deeper than any affair ever could. Because it wasn't just me he betrayed, it was her too. And still I stayed. I stayed through the lies. Through the loneliness. Through the whispers from neighbors when Daniel showed up at parties with excuses why I wasn't there. I stayed because I told myself, families don't quit. Mothers endure. But endurance turned into something darker. I started noticing his eyes glaze over when I spoke, like my words were background noise. I started noticing how his cologne wasn't the one I bought him. How his shirts smelled faintly of lavender, a scent I never wore. The final crack came the night Emily had her acceptance letter from Princeton. She screamed with joy, waving it in the air, tears streaming down her cheeks. It was the proudest moment of her life. And Daniel, he didn't even look up from his phone. He mumbled, "That's great, kiddo," and walked out to take a call. I remember Emily's eyes finding mine. They said without words, "Why isn't he here with us?" Had no answer. And that's when I realized something. He wasn't just gone. He had chosen to be gone. So when graduation came around and he stood up in that hall announcing his new life, do you know what I felt first? Not rage. Not even heartbreak. Relief. Because the man I married, the man I loved, had died long ago. This Daniel. This stranger with a girlfriend smirking in the front row. He was just the shell left behind. And still I smiled. Because my pain had already turned into resolve. You see, in those long nights of waiting, crying, questioning myself, I hadn't just been a victim. I had been documenting. Quietly. Carefully. Methodically. Every receipt he left crumpled in his pocket. Every suspicious charge on our bank account. Every phone bill with hours of late-night calls to a business partner. I saved it all. Not because I planned to use it, but because deep down I knew this day would come. And when he stood at that graduation, throwing me away in front of the entire town, he thought he was winning. He thought he was free. But the envelope in his hand proved otherwise. Inside it wasn't just evidence of betrayal. It was proof of something bigger. Something darker. You see, Daniel's lies weren't only about another woman. They were about money. About deals he had made in secret. About debts he thought I'd never uncover. And when he realized I had the evidence, the kind that could ruin his career, his reputation, even his freedom, he screamed. That scream wasn't for me. It was for himself. And as he crumpled in front of our friends, clutching that envelope with shaking hands, I finally felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power. But this was only the beginning. Because Daniel wasn't going to go down quietly. And neither was I. When Daniel screamed at the graduation, clutching that envelope, people assumed it was because I'd caught him with another woman. But the truth was so much uglier. That envelope didn't just hold photos of him sneaking into hotels. It didn't just hold receipts of dinners he lied about or late-night phone bills. No. That envelope was a Pandora's box of secrets he thought no one would ever uncover. And what still chills me to this day is how easily I found it all, because Daniel was careless. He thought I was blind, too busy holding our family together to notice his trails of destruction. But I noticed. It started with a credit card bill. One night, he fell asleep with his laptop open on the dining table. The screen glowed with numbers. Charges for things we never bought. Designer handbags, luxury hotels, expensive jewelry. Not for me. Not for Emily. My stomach dropped. I quietly copied the statements onto a flash drive. My hands shook, but my mind was strangely calm. Something inside me had clicked. No more excuses. No more blind loyalty. Over the next weeks, I became a detective in my own home. I checked his car's glove compartment, receipts from dinners 2 towns away. I checked our joint account. Thousands missing, funneled into business investments. I even checked the laundry basket. Hotel keycards tucked inside his pants pocket. Piece by piece, I built a picture of a man I didn't recognize. And then I found her. Not just as the other woman sitting smugly at graduation, but in his phone records. Dozens of calls. Texts that read like promises. And a photo of her wearing jewelry I had seen on our credit card bill. Her name was Vanessa. And here's where it gets worse. She wasn't some random fling. She wasn't a stranger he met at a bar. Vanessa was the sister of one of our closest friends. A woman who had sat at my dinner table. Who had clinked glasses with me on New Year's. Who had hugged my daughter and told her how proud she was. That betrayal cut deeper than anything Daniel could have done alone. Because it meant everyone around me had known. Maybe not the details. But enough to look away. Enough to smile through their teeth while stabbing me in the back. And as I dug deeper, I realized Vanessa wasn't with Daniel for love. She was with him for something much more dangerous. Money. Daniel wasn't just cheating on me. He was laundering money for a business partner, whose name kept popping up on the bank transfers. And when I searched that name, it belonged to a company under investigation for fraud. My heart raced. This wasn't just about a broken marriage. This was about crime. I remember staring at the flash drive in my hand, filled with documents and screenshots. Part of me wanted to scream. Part of me wanted to smash his laptop, confront him, make him feel the betrayal he had poured over us. But another part of me, the part that had been humiliated too many times, decided to wait. Wait for the perfect moment. Wait for the stage. Wait for him to think he had won. Graduation day became that stage. And that envelope. It wasn't random. It was carefully prepared. A printed summary of his sins. A neat folder of proof. A reminder that for once, I wasn't powerless. So when he opened it, surrounded by friends, family, colleagues, and his precious girlfriend, and saw that I knew about the fraud, the bank accounts, the lies, his scream was raw panic. Because he realized I had the power to destroy him. But here's the thing about men like Daniel. When cornered, they don't surrender. They fight. Dirty. That night, after the ceremony, he came home furious. Red-faced, shaking, slamming doors. "You think you're clever, Evelyn," he spat. "You think you can humiliate me in front of everyone?" I didn't flinch. I told him, "Clever isn't the word. Careful is." His face twisted. He grabbed the envelope, waving it in my face. "This doesn't mean anything. You have no idea who you're messing with." But I knew exactly who I was messing with. And I had no intention of backing down. Because what Daniel didn't realize was that I had already taken the next step. The envelope wasn't the only copy. The flash drive with all his secrets. I had already passed it to someone else. Someone he'd never expect. And soon Daniel's world was going to collapse from more than just an exposed affair. When Daniel slammed the door shut that night, pacing like a caged animal, I knew he thought he could scare me back into silence. That was always his tactic. Intimidation. Control. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that the envelope wasn't my weapon. It was just the warning shot. The real bullet was already in motion. Because days before graduation I had met with someone. Someone Daniel would never suspect. My lawyer. And not just any lawyer. Claire Reynolds. She was sharp, ruthless, and as fate would have it, the aunt of one of Emily's closest friends. When I reached out, trembling and embarrassed, expecting judgment, Claire only leaned across her desk and said 4 words that lit a fire in me. "Let's bury him alive." I gave her the flash drive. Every screenshot. Every receipt. Every transfer. Claire's eyes widened as she scrolled. "This isn't just infidelity," she said, her voice low. "This is fraud. Potential money laundering. And if he thinks you're too soft to use it, he's in for a surprise." So when Daniel roared in my face after graduation, waving that envelope, I kept calm because I knew the truth. The wheels of his downfall were already turning. And the first cracks showed faster than I imagined. The morning after graduation, Daniel's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. I could hear him in his study, yelling into calls. Slamming papers. "What do you mean the account is frozen? he shouted. No, don't you dare pull out of this deal. I pretended to sip coffee in the kitchen, but inside I was trembling. Not from fear, no. From adrenaline. By noon he stormed out, ignoring me completely. Hours later I got a text from Claire. The bank moved faster than we expected. His accounts are under review. He'll be cornered soon. Cornered. That word stayed with me. Because Daniel wasn't a man who handled pressure well. Sure enough, that evening the storm hit. He came home with Vanessa trailing behind him, her face pale, her heels clicking nervously against the tile. You did this, he hissed at me, eyes bloodshot. You went digging where you had no right. I stood tall. I had every right, Daniel. You used our money. You betrayed us. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably. She looked less like the smug mistress from graduation and more like a trapped bird. She finally spoke, her voice shaky. Daniel, she's serious. If she has the records, we're... Shut up, he snapped. But it was too late. I had heard the fear in her voice. Vanessa wasn't just complicit. She knew exactly what Daniel was tangled in. That's when it hit me. Vanessa hadn't just been his lover. She'd been his partner in crime. And now, she was cracking. Over the next days, the dominoes fell. First, his business partner cut ties. Then, one of our oldest family friends stopped returning his calls. Rumors spread quickly in our town. About the fight at graduation, the screaming, the mystery envelope. People whispered, but no one asked me directly. Then came the letter. Delivered by courier. Thick official paper. From the district attorney's office. I opened it with shaking hands. Investigation notice. Fraud, misappropriation of funds, tax evasion. Daniel's world was crumbling. When he saw the letter, he actually dropped into a chair, face ashen. For the first time in years, he didn't look powerful. He looked small. You don't understand, he muttered, almost to himself. They'll destroy me. Everything I've built. I wanted to scream. What about everything you destroyed? Me, Millie. But instead I just said, actions have consequences, Daniel. You should have thought of that before. And then came the twist I didn't expect. That night, when I was tucking Emily's graduation gown into her closet, she turned to me with wide, wet eyes. Mom, she whispered. Did you know Dad asked me not to tell you something? My heart stopped. She hesitated. A few months ago he offered to help me with tuition. But he said not to tell you. He said it would be our secret. Tears filled my eyes. Not because of the money, but because Daniel had dragged our daughter into his web of lies. He had tried to buy her silence, pit her loyalty against mine. That was the lowest blow. At that moment, all sympathy I had left for him evaporated. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Emily. It was about protecting her from a man who would manipulate his own daughter to cover his tracks. So when Claire called me the next morning and said, "It's time we make the first move," I didn't hesitate. I said, "Do it." And just like that, Daniel wasn't the only one preparing for war. Because I had finally chosen my side. And it wasn't his. For weeks, I had lived with knots in my stomach, waiting for Daniel's next move. But after Claire filed the first wave of paperwork, something inside me shifted. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting. I was leading. And that small change felt like breathing again. Started with Emily. One night after dinner, I found her sitting at the kitchen counter, chewing the end of her pencil as she worked through scholarship applications. Her eyes looked tired, her shoulders tense. My heart broke seeing her like that, carrying burdens no 18-year-old should. "Sweetheart," I said softly, sliding a mug of cocoa toward her. "You don't need to stress about money. I've got this." She looked up skeptical. "Mom, you don't even know what Dad promised me." "It was a lot." "I don't care what he promised," I told her, voice firm. "Because I promise you this. You will go to college without ever owing that man anything." Her eyes softened. Then, for the first time in months, she smiled. That smile was worth more than any secret bank account Daniel ever hid from me. From then on, it wasn't just about revenge. It was about rebuilding, for her, for me, for the life we deserved. Claire became my shield. Every time Daniel tried to call, threaten, or guilt-trip me, I forwarded it to her. She handled him with icy professionalism, never giving an inch. At one point, he even showed up at her office, demanding to see the documents. Claire told me later. He stormed out like a toddler denied candy. "You've got him cornered, Evelyn." Hearing those words gave me something I hadn't felt in years. Strength. I started noticing little victories. Like how I could sleep through the night without waking up to check if he was home. Like how I could sit at the dinner table with Emily and laugh, really laugh, without glancing at the door, waiting for him to interrupt. Even my house felt lighter, as if his absence had lifted a cloud. But Daniel, he was unraveling. I'd see him across town sometimes, arguing with business partners pacing outside banks. Rumors spread faster now. People whispered about frozen accounts and bad deals. Vanessa was rarely with him anymore. When I did spot her, she looked more like a nervous accomplice than a lover. One afternoon, Emily came home from the library and said almost shyly, "Mom, people keep asking me if it's true. If Dad really did all those things." I braced myself, ready to defend her, to protect her from the cruelty of gossip. But she surprised me. "I told them the truth," she said firmly. "That you're the one holding us together. That you're stronger than he'll ever be." I had to turn away for a moment because tears blurred my vision. She had seen me at my weakest. And still she saw strength. That night I sat in bed, staring at the ceiling, and whispered to myself, "I'm not a victim anymore." Still, Daniel wasn't finished. The next week, a thick envelope arrived in the mail. Inside was a letter. His handwriting angry and scrawled. "You think you've won. You've made a fool of me. But this isn't over. If you push me, I'll take you down with me." I read it twice, my hands trembling. For a moment the old fear returned. But then I remembered Claire's words. "He's cornered. Cornered men bark the loudest." So instead of crumbling, I placed the letter in a folder and labeled it evidence. Because Daniel wasn't just losing money. He was losing control. And every desperate move he made only built my case stronger. Relief didn't come all at once. Came in pieces. In Emily's laughter. In the silence of an empty house that finally felt peaceful. In the knowledge that for once, I wasn't powerless. I was prepared. And slowly, I started to dream again. I signed up for a part-time consulting job at a local firm. Nothing fancy, just a way to step back into the world I had given up for him. On my first day, I stood in front of the mirror, fixing my blazer, realizing I looked alive. When I came home that evening, Emily hugged me and said, "Mom, you look like yourself again." Her words stayed with me. Because for so long I had forgotten who that woman even was. But now she was back. Still, even as I built this new strength, I knew the storm wasn't over. Daniel wasn't going to accept defeat quietly. And I was right. Because one evening, as I was closing up the kitchen, headlights swept across the driveway. Car door slammed. Heavy footsteps on the porch. When I opened the door, Daniel stood there, eyes wild, clutching something in his hand. And the look on his face told me this wasn't just another empty threat. The night Daniel showed up at my door, headlights still glowing across the driveway, I felt my chest tighten. He looked nothing like the man I once married. His suit was wrinkled, his tie loose, his hair wild. His eyes, bloodshot, frantic, scanned me like I was both his enemy and his last hope. In his hand, he clutched a folder. "Evelyn," he rasped, his voice hoarse. "We need to talk. Now." I didn't move. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "There's nothing left to say, Daniel." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You don't understand. They're coming after me. The DA, the banks, everyone. If you hand over those files, if you keep pushing this, I'm finished. Do you want Emily's father to go to prison?" His words were meant to stab me where it hurt most, my daughter. But I didn't flinch. Emily doesn't need a father who destroys everything he touches, I said coldly. He laughed bitterly, the sound twisted. You think you've won. You think they'll see you as some saint. No, Evelyn. If I go down, I'll take you with me. You think those accounts were just mine. Your name is on half of them. Joint taxes. Joint business filings. Do you really think you'll walk away clean? For a flicker of a moment my heart skipped. He wasn't lying. On paper my name was tied to some of those accounts. But then I remembered. Claire had already prepared for this. She had explained how I could prove lack of knowledge, how I had documented my innocence. And more importantly, I had leverage he didn't know about. Still, I let him stew in his false confidence. Daniel, I said softly, you're right. We were partners. On paper. But only one of us was stupid enough to leave a trail. And guess what? That trail doesn't point to me. His face twisted. He shoved the folder toward me. Then take this. Evidence. Numbers. I'll give it to you. Just make it stop. I stared at him. My once proud husband, reduced to begging, sweating on our porch, trying to barter his way out of the pit he dug himself. For a moment I almost felt pity. Almost. But then I thought of Emily, clutching her Princeton letter while he ignored her for a phone call. I thought of every cold dinner, every lonely night, every lie he fed me while another woman sat at my table pretending to be a friend. And that pity died. I took the folder slowly, flipped through the pages. Bank records, shell companies, offshore accounts. Even Vanessa's name appeared more than once. So this was it, the full map of his empire of lies. I closed the folder, met his desperate eyes and said, "Thank you, Daniel. You just handed me the last piece I needed." His jaw dropped. What are you saying?" I stepped back and shut the door. On the other side, his fists pounded the wood, his voice breaking into screams. "You can't do this to me. Evelyn, I made you. You were nothing without me." But his words rolled off me like water, because I finally understood the truth. I had always been the strong one. I had always been the one holding our lives together. He wasn't my savior. He was my anchor dragging me down. And I was done drowning. The next morning I met Claire at her office. I slid the folder across her desk. Her eyes widened as she flipped through it. "Evelyn," she breathed, "do you realize what this means? This isn't just fraud. This is enough to bury him completely. He won't just lose his money, he'll lose everything." I sat back, calm for the first time in years. Good. Let him feel what it's like to lose something he thought he owned. Claire smiled, sharp and proud. "We'll move fast. By the time he realizes what's happening, it'll already be over." And for once, I wasn't afraid of the fight ahead. Because I knew the final blow wasn't mine to land. It would be his own greed, his own arrogance, his own choices finally catching up to him. That night I tucked Emily in. She looked at me with wide, worried eyes. "Mom, what's going to happen to Dad?" I kissed her forehead. "Whatever happens, Emily, it's because of the choices he made. Not you. Not me. Him." She nodded slowly, then whispered, "I'm glad you're not scared anymore." Neither was I. But Daniel, he was terrified. And he had every reason to be. Because the next knock on his door wouldn't be me. It would be the law. It happened faster than I thought. 2 weeks after I gave Claire that final folder, the police came for Daniel. Not quietly, not discreetly. They came in broad daylight, flashing lights spilling across the neighborhood. Everyone saw. Vanessa tried to slip away, but she wasn't spared either. Her name was all over the documents. She looked at me once across the street, her face pale with panic. I didn't look back. Daniel shouted, pleaded, cursed as they cuffed him. But his words had no power anymore. For the first time, he wasn't the man in control. He was just another liar exposed. Emily stood by my side, clutching my hand. "It's over, isn't it?" she whispered. I squeezed her fingers. "Yes, sweetheart. It's over. In court, the evidence spoke louder than I ever could. Fraud. Laundering. Betrayal. The judge's words sealed his fate, but his downfall had already happened the moment he underestimated me. When it was done, I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I simply walked out, my daughter beside me, free in a way I hadn't been in decades. That night, for the first time in years, I slept without fear. I am Evelyn. I was betrayed, broken, humiliated. But I rose. I fought. And I won. If you've ever felt small, powerless, trapped in someone else's shadow, remember this. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's silent. Sometimes it waits. And when the moment comes, it burns brighter than any lie. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you, share your thoughts below. Like, comment, and subscribe, because stories like mine, they deserve to be heard.